Okay. We'll be moving on to issue 14, Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Mr. Edwards will be presenting.
So within this agenda item, there are 3 issues. The first is the administration proposed $5.8 million for 48 additional positions for the Investigative Services Unit within the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. The Assembly approved the request, but it was rejected in the Senate. We are recommending the Senate action, which is consistent with our previous recommendation, to reject the funding because it has not, in our view, been justified on a workload basis. The second issue is the administration requested $4 million in general fund ongoing for training supervisors and for a management and succession planning. The Assembly approved the proposal as budgeted, and the Senate approved the funding but adopted budget bill language directing the department to instead to use the funds for different training purposes. In particular, the budget bill language directs the department to develop a workforce excellence training program aimed at implementing innovative training approaches in prisons identified as having high levels of violence and other indicators of stress in the workplace. We don't have a lot of detail about how the training programs proposed by the administration or the Senate would be implemented, and so we don't have a recommendation on this issue. And then finally, the third issue relates to Senate adopting some additional funding for training and some trailer bill language. In particular, the Senate provided an additional $3 million general fund, including $2 million in one-time funding for CDCR to develop a new cadet mentoring program, and $1 million in one-time funding for the department to develop innovative management grants, such as for supporting staff resilience training. Finally, the Senate adopted trailer bill language, creating a new senior warden position. We think the Senate proposals could have some merit, although at this point we don't have a great level of detail on these proposals. The legislature may want to weigh these funding proposals against other general fund augmentation priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costa.
Thank you. We appreciate the legislature's interest in supporting the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation's goals to improve their workforce through a variety of efforts, such as enhanced training and developing staff to become future leaders within the department. We would note that we have concern regarding some of the language proposed as it may be too prescriptive. CDCR's leadership has made training and retention of staff a priority and is focused on improving its workforce. But they do need flexibility to be able to adjust those needs based on the evolving correctional environment. And with that, if there are specific proposals within the package that you'd like to discuss, we'd be happy to address those.
Thank you. Senator Nielsen.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sensitive to some positions in the investigative unit. The transition over the last few years in our institutions has resulted in a lot more gang leaders being out on the main line. And this has a lot of implications, and the investigative units are the ones who kind of keep track of this. I would not go along with this full request, but CDCR probably could handle it within. But they could come forth with a little better proposal. For sure, and in terms of their management development, mentorship training, that is an important thing within the department. I couldn't go along with this issue just as it is here today, but I will note that some attention in that department is in order.
Thank you. Senator Hancock.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Does this mic work? Yeah, I keep having the feeling that it doesn't. Let me explain a little bit more about this for the committee, because Sub 5 did work very hard on this, and I must say that I've been fortunate to have a Republican colleague who works very, very closely with me on these issues, and for the last several years, another Democratic colleague that has too, Senator Anderson and Senator Bell. And as we watch the department grapple with some of the challenges it has, it did strike us that there really needs to be an emphasis on the rehabilitation piece of this. And there really needs to be a culture change, is how we started talking about it. And I've been very gratified because the new secretary designate has also talked about that and has also picked up on the fact that if you're going to do that, you have to prepare your correctional officers to be part of a world that talks about rehabilitation, not just about containment and suppression, which is what a very great deal of the past training has done. So I really like the leadership training proposals that the new secretary designate has put forward. They're, I think, very innovative and will be very helpful. We did agree that the investigative services unit might not be the top priority, that the training of new supervisors probably should be accommodated within the existing training budget because it's, again, a backlog of things that should have been happening all along. What we are very interested in is the department working with the National Institute of Corrections on a mentorship program for new cadets, where some of our supervisors would get some specialized training and would work with the new cadets when they come to their first jobs. We've heard too often from staff on every level in the department that you go to the admittedly somewhat limited training of our basic academy, which has been shortened and is highly devoted to using the baton and other kinds of things like that. But even then, when they leave the basic academy and go to their first job, they're told by their supervisors, forget everything you learned there. This is how we do it here. And it would really, I think, make a huge difference to have positive leadership mentors, the captains and lieutenants, some of which are just doing remarkably excellent work right now, explicitly having a cadre of mentors for these new cadets when they come in that would model rehabilitated behavior so the cadets could model rehabilitated behavior for incarcerated people. We're interested in the money for innovative management grants because basically, for me, my background has been in education, and I've watched schools transform themselves through various grants to work with everybody, from every employee, students, and families, to define a new school culture and how to get better results. These are beginning to enter the world of corrections, and we ought to take advantage of it. And again, these would be voluntary programs. What you need is a willing warden, staff that want to try something a little different because it will make all their lives better. And I do have to say that I've talked extensively on my visits to prisons and also with CCPOA in the Capitol, and I think they recognize that their workforce is highly stressed and has a number of problems on many, many levels, and are very interested in finding new ways for us all to work together to get a different sort of prison environment. And I think they're also working with CDCR leadership, and there's just a lot of potential here. the trailer bill language related to the senior warden position is because, frankly, when you can retire at age 50 and you're living in a highly stressed institution that often has very unpleasant things going on, everybody leaves the minute they turn 50, and including some very creative and innovative staff. And it did occur to us that if there was a way for particularly creative staff to be retained with a salary incentive or whatever, similar to what the federal government does with what they call senior executive service, which is something that you have to apply for. It's an honor to get. It is not an automatic thing that just keep on and get a little more money. It's because you're so good, we want to keep you. And that we should explore that because, again, we have many creative people that might be persuaded to stay and help with the changes that we need to make. So, having said that, I hope that in the next couple of days we can work on a compromise with the Assembly and with the administration and see where we could get on this.
Thank you. Oh, Finance? Sorry.
Josh Gauger, Department of Finance. So I did just want to note that the administration doesn't agree in concept with a few of the proposals in here, a few of which were just mentioned. Specifically, the mentorship training with the National Institute of Corrections. We do think that that has merit to it, but I think given the conversation and like was mentioned, the secretary and the department has shown a commitment to improving training in this area, that it may be premature to require this this relationship, and we do think parts of that proposal are bargainable issues, so we think that it would be prudent to give the department time to work with our union partners and with the National Institute of Corrections, and if at that time we thought that a proposal was necessary, we would come forward with one, and we think that through the proposal that was submitted here that has led to these conversations, the administration has demonstrated that we are interested in improving training and leadership at the department as a whole. Secondly, on the language, another example of some areas that we agree in concept is some of the language tied to the correctional peace officer standards and training. We agree that in concept, looking at consideration of additional training in the areas of mental health and rehabilitation and the history of corrections is potentially good training that in concept we would be interested in looking at going forward, and we can continue to have those conversations. I did just also want to make a note about the investigative services unit staff that was rejected by the Senate. As of September 2015, there was the Ashker v. Brown settlement, which really moves the department away from a series of, or a system of indeterminate segregated housing unit terms to a series of, to a system of determinate sentences based on behavior violations. And also there were changes, substantial changes to the existing step-down program that's going to allow inmates to more expeditiously move to a step of the program where they're housed in the general population. All of these changes have resulted in thousands of segregated housing unit beds being converted to general population, and under some of the guidelines and rules laid out under standardized staffing, that's led to over $40 million in reductions tied to efficiencies in how those units are staffed. We don't think that it's an unreasonable request to put forward, a request to retain 48 positions to maintain public safety tied to some of those conversions and the movement of thousands of inmates from segregated housing units to general population, where there's greater access and communication. So we also did recognize that this proposal is, a new direction, and existing data is not necessarily the way to substantiate the request, and that's why as part of our request, we put forward 26 of the 48 positions as 2-year limited term positions where we would intend to come back and over the 2-year period, evaluate the ongoing need for this level of resources.
Thank you. I do want to note the Assembly is getting ready to close down their floor session very soon, and we have quite a few items left to discuss. Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With note of that, I will be brief and also recognize that we're leaving this item open, so not to drag it out too much longer. But I did want to continue where Finance just left off. Mr. Edwards, can you tell us what the investigative unit, services unit, 48 positions will actually be doing? So, as just noted, as a result of settlement, there will be fewer people in solitary confinement. So they're being returned to the general population. What will these 48 people be doing relative to those who were formerly in solitary confinement?
So part of our concern was that there was not a whole lot of justification for this proposed augmentation to the ISU. And so it's difficult to know exactly what they would be doing. I think what we understand from conversations with the administration is that they are anticipating that as the population of gang leaders in the segregated housing units declines and they go back to general population, that there could be some uptick in gang activity and some uptick in violence, and that these positions would be allocated to sort of monitor the gang behavior and to make sure there isn't an increase in violence.
So that's a concept, but they really haven't fleshed it out. How many people are we talking about leaving solitary confinement, joining the general population?
I will defer to the folks from finance on this. I don't have the specific number. I'd be happy to get back to you with that unless they have the data.
I believe since the Ashker v. Brown settlement, there's been approximately 1,100 inmates that have been moved from segregated housing to general population settings.
I would just want to be a little bit careful that we don't broad brush all 1,100 as gang leaders. Oftentimes, people were in solitary confinement for years and for decades, and prior to the settlement, the only way for them to get out of solitary confinement was to renounce a gang, which was to put a death warrant on themselves. And so it was a very complex situation. Many people were there unnecessarily, and so I don't want us to suggest we've placed 1,100 very dangerous, scary gang leaders back into the general population, and I'm not so certain we need 48 people overseeing this population when we haven't really assessed who they are. And there must be also some fewer staffing needed in the special housing units because these 1,100 are no longer there. So we're actually relieving any number of people, I don't know how many, maybe you can help me with that, from duty, and now we need to add more people. What about all the people who are no longer going to be involved with the special housing units?
So this proposal was tied to a larger housing unit adjustment, and so the department did reduce their funding for segregated housing units, so they are reverting some positions in general fund authority associated with staffing those segregated housing units.
How many people?
I'm sorry. I don't have a specific position authority number, but it's over $40 million tied to position reductions for these housing unit conversions. And that's, Alice, the LAO mentioned, of the $40 million reduction between the governor's budget and the May revision, we're requesting to retain 48 positions, if you will, to, in our view, protect public safety and monitor for any increases in gang activity.
Okay, I don't think it's an unreasonable request on the part of this committee that you bring us a little bit more detail here. How many people? What are they going to be doing when we talk about watching out? What are their duties going to be? How many people are no longer going to be involved? I get the $40 million figure, but how many people does that translate in terms of officers no longer needed in the special housing unit? So we rejected it. I'm open to revisiting this, but we need more information.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments up here? Seeing none, we will be moving on to issue 15. Mr. Peterson, Department of Corrections Rehabilitation Programming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Jonathan Peterson with the Legislative Analyst's Office. As indicated, this is issue 15, which should be on page 44 in your agenda. In both January and May, the governor proposed a series of augmentations to rehabilitative programs. Both the Senate and Assembly approved those requests as budgeted. In addition to those augmentations, the Senate approved $11 million in augmentations for rehabilitative programs, which is the issue in front of the legislature today. These augmentations focus on services for long-term offenders, providing arts programs in state prisons, and community college courses for inmates. Because there is a limit to the funding available for rehabilitative programs, we recommend that the legislature focus on programs that have the greatest impact on recidivism. Doing this can prevent the greatest number of crimes in the future. To accomplish this, the legislature should focus on programs that first target offenders who are classified as a higher risk to recidivate, and two, have been shown, if implemented according to best practices, to be cost-effective ways to reduce recidivism, and in particular have been evaluated to be cost-effective as implemented in California. We are available to answer any questions you have about the components of the Senate proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Senator Hancock, I know you worked a lot on these. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Costa. Please.
Thank you. I would just note, as the analyst noted, we appreciate both houses' adoption of the administration's broader rehabilitative programming proposals. We don't support the legislative augmentations. I would note that the administration does not have concerns with the proposed trailer bill that would provide extended family visits for life-term inmates.
Thank you, Ms. Costa. Senator Hancock.
Yeah, part of our interest is part of our commitment to doing this is that, as you may remember, we had an anti-recidivism fund and some innovative programming fund that the legislature and the governor agreed on a number of years ago. Those programs have been extremely effective, and we want them to continue. One of the things we tried to do was, and I think did successfully do, was replicate some of the very successful programs in some of our prisons, most notably San Quentin, in other parts of the state and in other prisons. What you get when you do that is social entrepreneurs that are really dedicated to doing the work in prisons. If you've ever been to the Prison University Project or some of the other projects that are being replicated now, you would feel the difference that is there. You get outside eyes in a closed institution, which is very important for everybody in terms of the atmosphere that's there. The artist facilitator positions actually used to be at CDCR. They were cut not too many years ago, and the idea is that they would not only expand our very successful prison arts program to all prisons, but that they would also be able to facilitate the other innovative programming. I really hope that we can talk some more about this in the next few days, because it's money very, very well spent, I think.